Today, we are exploring a staggering true story of extreme survival and human psychology. It's a narrative that literally pushes the absolute boundaries of what we think is physically and mentally possible. We're looking at the events of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, an event that's often referred to as frozen between heaven and earth. So let's get right into this explainer and break down exactly how one of history's greatest survival stories unfolded. Okay, let's dive into this. 72. That is the number of unbelievable days a group of survivors found themselves stranded in one of Earth's harshest, most unforgiving environments. Just imagine that for a second. We aren't talking about a few hours or about weekend trip. We are talking about over 2 solid months of trying to survive in a completely hostile, frozen landscape. How did they get there? And honestly, more importantly, how did anyone actually make it out? Part 1. Disappearance in the Andes, October 13th, 1972. Picture this. On board Flight 571 were 45 people. Specifically, we're talking about young rugby players, along with their families and friends. They were simply heading to Chile, completely expecting a safe, routine journey. I mean, nobody on that plane could have possibly imagined that this joyful expectation would suddenly turn into a horrifying reality, disappearing completely into the towering Andes Mountains. And this brings us to a terrifying, fatal miscalculation. As the aircraft struggled through thick clouds, the pilots fully believed they had already crossed the mountains. But they hadn't. They were flying blind through some incredibly intense weather, totally convinced the dangerous part of the journey was behind them. In reality, the towering peaks were right in front of them. What followed was completely without warning. The plane slammed directly into a snow-covered peak. The sheer force of that impact was so violent that the wings ripped completely away. So without wings, the remaining fuselage essentially turned into a giant, uncontrollable sled. It skidded violently across the ice until it finally came to a stop in a frozen valley entirely surrounded by those massive mountains. Tragically, many of the passengers died instantly in this initial sequence. Part 2. Trapped in a frozen valley, the abyss. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the altitude. 11,000 feet. The survivors didn't just crash. They crashed at an extreme elevation of over 11,000 feet. To put that into perspective, at this height, the air is incredibly thin. It's difficult to even catch your breath on a good day, let alone when you're trying to recover from massive traumatic injuries. They were completely and utterly trapped in this high-altitude, freezing environment. When we stack up the conditions they were actually facing, the odds against survival become truly overwhelming. As we just established, they're trapped at over 11,000 feet. But on top of that, they have absolutely no food, they have very little clothing, because remember, they were expecting a totally routine flight, not some Arctic expedition. And to make matters worse, they're battling freezing temperatures that drop far, far below zero every single night. And as days turned into weeks, the disasters just kept compounding. We know the crash happened on October 13th. Then, weeks later, the survivors, who had been desperately listening to a small radio, praying for a rescue, hear an absolutely heartbreaking truth. The official search had been called off. The entire world believed they were dead. Sometime after dealing with that totally crushing emotional blow, a deadly avalanche strikes. It buries the wreckage they were using for shelter, and it claims even more lives. So, faced with these completely impossible choices, how do you even react? Well, they found unity. In this context, unity meant sharing every single scrap of hope they had left. It meant meticulously caring for the injured among them, and it meant absolutely refusing to surrender, even when the rest of the world had given up on them. This specific psychological shift is exactly what laid the groundwork for what happened next. Part 3. The impossible mountain trek 2 months later. After spending more than 2 months trapped in that frozen wilderness, 2 specific survivors decided, someone has to step up here. Those individuals were Fernando Parado and Roberto Canessa. They made the monumental decision to attempt what everyone else considered completely impossible, walking out of the Andes themselves to find help. So the crucial point is understanding the sheer physical and mental toll of what these 2 men actually did. Step 1, they had to build homemade gear out of whatever scattered debris they could find from the plane. Step 2, they literally had to climb the snow-covered peaks of the Andes Mountains. And step 3, they had to walk for 10 exhausting days. Keep in mind, they were doing all of this after 2 entire months of starvation and freezing conditions. To really appreciate this, consider the stark contrast of their situation. They were undertaking an agonizing 10-day journey across snow-covered peaks that absolutely no one believed could possibly be crossed on foot. They weren't just fighting the elements. They were defying the known limits of human endurance and geography itself. After 10 grueling days, we reach this crucial, almost movie-like encounter. Parado and Canessa finally spot another human being. It's a Chilean shepherd, standing across a rushing river. You can only imagine the adrenaline, right? But there was a huge problem. The river was way too loud. They were entirely unable to hear each other over the crashing water. But in a brilliant moment of quick thinking, the shepherd actually managed to throw them some paper and a pencil across the gap. Parado desperately scribbled down a profound yet incredibly simple message and threw it back. It read, "We have survived a plane crash. Others are still alive." Think about that. After all that time, after everyone assumed they had completely perished in the mountains, this tiny piece of paper proved to be impossible was actually true. Part 4. Triumph of the Human Spirit. The Resolution. Because of that one desperate note, a massive rescue mission was instantly mobilized. Rescuers finally arrived at the crash site by helicopter. Just remember the sheer magnitude of their ordeal here. They had survived 72 days in literally the harshest environment on Earth. In the end, out of the 45 people who initially boarded that plane, 16 total survivors were successfully rescued and brought back home. And this brilliantly illustrates the true core of this entire event. The legacy of Flight 571 amazed the whole world, sure, but not simply because of the gruesome details of the crash itself. It captivated the globe because of the extraordinary courage, the flawless teamwork, and the sheer determination that kept those 16 people alive when all hope seemed entirely lost. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, lingering question. Think about everything we've just uncovered today. When hope seems impossible and the odds are entirely overwhelming, just how much can the human spirit truly endure? Today, Flight 571 stands as a powerful, permanent reminder that even in the absolute darkest of moments, human resilience can defy all logic. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredible story, and I really hope it leaves you thinking about the boundless strength of the human spirit.